All right, you guys ready to go?
Yep.
All right. Welcome everybody to the new Devy's owners. Let me start over. Welcome everybody to the new Devy Owners Manual. You might recognize me from Dynasty Owners Manual. I'm Adam Wildy, and I'm joined by the new hosts, Andrew Harbaugh and Dwight Peebles of Dynasty Happy Hour. How you guys doing?
Good. How are you, man?
I'm doing good. This is exciting. How about you, Andrew?
I'm good as well. Excited as well to see where this goes.
All right. So, Andrew, let's start with you. How did you get into Devy and kind of scouting?
I would say the biggest reason I got into Devy and scouting would be just listening to different podcasts and watching different people on ESPN and NFL Network, people like Daniel Jeremiah, Matt Miller, Mel Kiper until recently, and then Todd McShay more recently. And then as far as a transition to fantasy with those rookies, my grandfather has been in a dynasty league for years, and he always had me scout the college players for his rookie drafts because he didn't have time for it, he told me, which led to several debates on players, biggest one being Chris Johnson or Lima Sweden a draft. So I told him Chris Johnson, so I think that was my first good call.
That's awesome. And what about you, Dwight? What got you into the Devy side of things?
Good. I heard about this Devy thing on the Dynasty Life podcast, which was the first Dynasty podcast I listened to, and thought it was absolutely crazy. But the more I thought about it, it was what a better way to invest in players and to get them while they're in college. Like you could have had Saquon Barkley 3 years ago, which is a crazy thought if you think about it.
Yeah.
And then this offseason was the first one I got into like really scouting my own, because there's so much buzz at the combine and there's so much noise. You scout the players yourself, you can cut through that noise. I mean, you see things that you just don't see. Like the combine is one tiny little piece of the puzzle, but to watch the game and scout the players, it's so much more fun. It makes you feel more invested in everything. And when you hit, it definitely feels better. So.
Sure, when it was your own process. Definitely trust but verify. Listen to those big names out there, but do the homework yourself. And also, you're one of the big IDP contributors for Dynasty Happy Hour. What kind of got you into the second side of the football that we all tend to forget about?
I started an IDP about 8 years ago. The first couple of years, it was really bad. I was just drafting names. There wasn't a lot of Devy or IDP resources. You had to really search for them. I didn't even find Twitter till probably 2 years ago, and I found IDP Guru, and then I started like learning to do more research myself, and I just enjoy watching the whole game. It's just, to me, it makes it more fun to watch. Like it's not just the offense is sexy, but the defense is where you put in the work. That's what I think.
Right, except for defense doesn't matter, right?
It does. Yeah, be quiet. We'll see at this next draft, son.
So, Andrew, you mentioned Chris Johnson a little bit. Who are some of the other earliest players that you remember scouting?
I remember my biggest time I dove into the whole scouting process would probably have to be the 2013 class, which is historically bad, especially with the quarterbacks being led by Geno Smith and E.J. Manuel. I was a senior in high school, and I had an elective. I could do whatever I wanted, and I could turn it into a class for an extra credit. And I went to one of my teachers, and I said, "Can I do a scouting class?" And they go, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm just going to watch football players for 45 minutes every day." And they're like, "Okay, that's fine. You get all the credits, graduate anyway." So that's where I got my first jump into the deep end of it, and I came to the conclusion that I didn't like Geno Smith or E.J. Manuel, and apparently the NFL came to that conclusion too.
So let's bring this into the Devy aspect of things then. We've got you guys' start to this whole scouting situation, and why it's so important to Dynasty for sure, but then we've also got Devy. So I understand you're pretty heavily involved in a lot of Devy leagues. What are some strategies that you deploy, Dwight, in getting ahead in those leagues?
Well, it's important when you have the Devy, when you study that, you realize that there are certain classes that have strengths and weaknesses, and you use that to your advantage. Like, for instance, we know that the one coming up is definitely more loaded in wide receivers, whereas last year was running back. So you kind of know that landscape. You know that in 2020 it's going to be running back heavy. So you can build your team, and if you have to rebuild the team, it's even more critical to know that, you know, you've got these like 3 or 4 really good running backs, but you suck at wide receiver. You know that next year, you know, you've got that class coming in, so you can pick up those Devy players, you know, your AJ Browns and your, you know, I'm trying to think of names right now. DK probably might still come out, you know, but you know that it's coming up, and you can angle yourself to kind of be ahead of the curve. And you know that if you're hurting and running back, you know that 2020 is coming, and you can acquire those players, you know, next year, this year, and kind of position yourself. It just, if you're rebuilding specifically, it definitely helps to know the landscape of the classes and things like that. It just, it's like a chess game almost, to know that set your Devy up right. I love it.
All right, so let's dig into that a little bit. So let's take Devy out of it a little bit then, and we're just going to talk dynasty for this section. So if you are rebuilding, let's say we have that 2-year window, then you're one of the owners that has a 2-year window and is starting right now. Are you looking to add those 2020 picks then? Like you said, you've got the running back class in 2020, but you have these big wide receivers, the Harrys, Metcalf, Brown coming out this next year, but you're really hurting at running back. Are you looking to add a 2020 first in every trade, or is that a situation where you'd employ that strategy?
Absolutely, yeah. That's what I mean. You use the whole landscape to your advantage. You know that if you've got guys like Devontae Freeman, if he comes back ever, you know, if you've got a guy that's got 1 or 2 good years left in him, then you can position yourself to where you're in that spot to gain those 2020 first, when we're going to have like probably 6 running backs that are going to be legit RB1s, I think. So you definitely use that to your advantage. It's just, you survey the whole landscape, and it allows you to see ahead of time, you know, and that's what I really love about it. It adds a whole different element.
So if I'm understanding correctly, let's say that you've got Devonta Freeman right now. You're going to have a little harder of a time getting a 19 first. Of course, he's still worth 1, but would you consider instead getting, let's say, something like Duke Johnson in a 2020 first then? So you have a running back that's kind of working right now, and then you've got that 2020 first?
Absolutely. That's how you use it to your advantage. You do things like that can position yourself, because most people will throw out a 2020 pick like it's nothing. I mean, you can get those pretty easily, because even the most people don't think that far out in the grand scheme of things. And when you're building that roster for that long-term depth, and yeah, and even then, even if you have that 2020 pick, then next year it's going to be worth more. And then as it gets closer to the draft, it's going to be even worth more. So yeah, it just definitely that's the kind of trade you want to make to be successful, using picks in advance like that.
Got you. So let's bring it back to Devy a little bit here. So Andrew, I think we both think that they're kind of crazy for this, but I'll just ask to make sure. Have you scouted anyone in high school yet?
I have not. No. A little bit about this on the side. To me, that just seems ludicrous to go that deep into it. But I mean, if you have enough time and you can get all the way into high school, I mean, it's just so hard, because like I remember Matt Barkley, when he committed to USC, Matt Barkley was the next big thing. When Jimmy Clausen went to Notre Dame, he was the next big thing. And both of them now, Jimmy Clausen, I don't think's with a team, and Barkley is the backup, I think, in Cincinnati. So I mean, it just so much changes. But that's the beautiful part of Devy, is it at least lets you keep tabs on those guys. People transfer, people get hurt. There's just always something going on.
So let's hear your side of it, Dwight. You've scouted some high school players, right?
Yes, I have. I have a very deep 800 player Devy league, and we were dipping into the high school pool, and it's definitely tricky. The game tape is not as big of an issue. You use resources like 24/7 Sports. They're absolutely awesome at like ranking those things. You know to look at the powerhouse schools like your St. John Bosco, your IMG Academy, Allen, Texas. There's some big schools like that tend to churn out those those pro or not pro, the big time college players, the 5 stars and stuff. So I've done some. It's definitely tricky. I mean, but it's just another tool. It's nice to ask my wife what she thinks of it. But it's just it is a little weird, scouting high school kids, and especially being just a fantasy football guy. I'm not like a college recruiter, so it's definitely different. But I have done some of it. Yeah.
At least you can feel better now that you've got a Devy podcast, so you can say you were doing research for your podcast instead of for your 1-800-person league.
Exactly.
So what's your favorite high school player you just got?
There's a kid called I'm gonna butcher his last name. He's the quarterback for St. John Bosco. DJ Uiagalelei. I don't know. Uiagalelei. He's a junior. He's
DJU.
Yeah, he's 6'5", 240 pounds. He is a monster, and he's a junior.
Did you say he was a junior?
He's a junior. He hasn't even committed yet.
Awesome. I mean, Lane Kiffin offered Matt Leinert's 11-year-old son a scholarship today.
Crazy.
So, oh, that happens all the time. There's no real commitment there, though. I mean, they can do whatever they want.
Right.
All right. So let's talk about the show a little bit here. Let's dial it in. So we'll start with you, Andrew. Just kind of give the listeners a little bit what they can expect from the show and what they can use this to their advantage for. So our show, Dynasty Owner's Manual, we use a lot of practical application, and we want to send the listeners away with resources that they can use. What kind of things are you offering here at Devy Owner's Manual?
I think what you can get from me and Dwight is an enthusiasm. I mean, you heard it from Dwight. He's going all the way down to high school, so he's obviously enthusiastic about it. I'm very enthusiastic about it on the college level. So I think together with the two of us, and him being an IDP guy and me being a more offensive guy, can expect a package from us while also being enthusiastic about the product you'll hear. You'll have to come to your own conclusions, but we'll at least walk you down the yellow brick road as close to Oz as we can. And it's up to you to get what you want out of them.
I love it. What about you, Dwight?
Right. I think we're going to bring a little bit of everything to it. There's some shows like Saturday to Sunday and the Devy Watch that give great knowledge on the players and stuff, but I don't feel like their practical application is quite as good. And I hope we can help with that. We can go over the players, some of the names you need to know, but I hope that we can help, like the Dynasty Owner's Manual, help you use it to your advantage to, even if you don't play Devy, use the Devy to learn more about the pro game. And that's just a good tool to have. Even if you just listen to us and hear us talking about Dwayne Haskins, and then you see that name pop up in the draft next year and hey, it clicks. So we're hoping we can help you use that knowledge to be a better dynasty football player.
Right, and similar to Dynasty Owner's Manual, what we do over there, it's just that there's so many great podcasts out there. You can pretty much throw a dart at a dartboard, and you're going to find a great podcast that's telling you what to do right now, and that's amazing. All we do differently, that we're going to do differently on Devy Owner's Manual and that we do differently at Dynasty Owner's Manual, is that we use the players in their current standing to help you understand how to identify these situations in the future. So hopefully with this show, you two are bringing in the strategy side of things, both Devy and Dynasty, where you're telling our listeners, how did you find these players? Why do we know that Metcalf is amazing? Unfortunately, he got injured, but that's really what I look forward to getting out of this show. So Dwight, let's talk about the draft a little bit, because that's going to be the hottest topic. Unfortunately for us, it's not too offensive heavy. What are you looking at the defensive side of the ball coming out? Anything crazy that we need to watch for?
No, it's just going to be very deep. I've seen the mock drafts showing anywhere from 15 to 20 defensive players going in the first round.
Wow.
Which is, then you add in a couple offensive linemen, you're looking at only 6 or 7 offensive skill set players that are going into the draft. And it's a time when I feel like the NFL needs an infusion of talent. As long as they can teach these guys how to fall on the quarterback right, they'll be all right. But there's just the defensive line is silly. There's everybody's heard about the Clelin Ferrells, the Jeffrey Simmons. There's just so many of them. Like, yeah, Dexter Lawrence, Ed Oliver, Nick Bosa. There's just tons and tons of defensive linemen. I mean, even if these defensive linemen don't get, tons and tons of sacks, there's going to be guys that are going to definitely create pressure and make the lines better, which makes every aspect of a defense better. So, yeah, as an IDP guy, it definitely has got me, salivating a little bit. It's exciting, man. It's really awesome.
Sure. And what's great about you knowing so much about the defensive side of the ball is when we start breaking down these offensive players, it's really going to matter what matchups these players succeeded in. I mean, we don't really care if A.J. Brown went off against Towson, I guess, but right. If you can identify these matchups that these players really dominated in and really say, okay, that was an NFL level talent, that was a first round caliber corner that he was matched up with against all game, that makes a big difference. But on the flip side of the ball, Andrew, there are some diamonds in the rough here too. What are some of the guys that you're looking at on the offensive side of the ball coming out this year?
Real quick to touch on Dwight's point with not having sacks for IDP, just throw my 2 cents and something to think about. Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney, both #1 picks, both difference makers for their team's defenses. Combined, their last years in college had 5.5 sacks or 11.5 sacks combined.
Wow.
So while it may not seem like a lot then, you're seeing it now transitioning over. As far as potential diamonds on the offensive side, you got to really dig a hole to find a couple, I would say, this year. I mean, but every year there's always a couple that you don't expect come draft time, and situation plays a part of that too. I'd probably say the 2 biggest ones that I'm high on is the running back out of Iowa State, David Montgomery, and Noah Fant from tight end from Iowa. Now, Rodney Anderson, the running back from Oklahoma, and DK Metcalf from Ole Miss, they're both injured. If they decide to come out this year, because it's going to be a little bit of a weaker offensive draft, just their draft stock, they could still potentially be for picks or higher picks. I think if they declare, then they would get qualified into that as well. If they decide to stay and go back to school, then it's still something we could talk about. But I'd probably say Montgomery and Fant are the 2 that I expect to come out and are going to be producers.
All right, so we talked about 2020 being super deep at running back. We already know that 2019 has been considered deep at wide receiver by many. Do you 2 agree with that? Is 2019 going to be an extremely deep wide receiver class?
I think so, yeah. It's, I mean, maybe not extremely deep, but definitely a lot deeper than running back and quarterback.
2014 deep?
No, I don't know. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think
we'll hold off on that.
Yeah.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah.
I do think the tight ends aren't getting as much love as they should. I think they're a little about defensive ends with sacks not being a sexy stat. A lot of these tight ends are only getting 12 to 15 catches so far this year just because they aren't being utilized in the college offenses as much. But like I said, you got Noah Fant from Iowa, Dawson Knox from Ole Miss, Albert O from Missouri, number 81. Caden Smith from Stanford had a really good game this past week, I believe. It's just about figuring out and looking through and watching these players, they start to stick out a little bit more. And Albert O in Missouri, I was watching Drew Lock when I noticed him more. I wasn't as impressed with Lock as I was with him. So, I mean, you're going to find that too. You're going to be looking at another player, but you'll see someone else pop up on stop.
Awesome. So do you guys think that Jadeveon Clowney goes first overall if it weren't for that huge hit? That was something that came to mind when you mentioned those first overalls. I'm thinking they only had 11 sacks. Oh, maybe that hit really did have something to do with that.
And Dwight's all about high school. Clowney was the #1 prospect that year out of high school.
Yep.
So he was talked about all the way back then. So
All right, all right. Sorry for the rant. Let's get into the news. So I'll hit the highlight of the news, and then we'll just have open discussion about these three big topics. So we have the DK Metcalf injury. That's extremely unfortunate. Seemed to have been rising up you Devy guys board. We have Malik Rozier named starter for the U, and then we also have Bosa leaving. I can't wait to talk about that one. But let's get to you, Andrew, first. What would you like to touch on the news of late?
As far as the Metcalf injury goes, something I didn't even think about until I was listening to Stick to Football this morning with Connor Rogers and Matt Miller. Sometimes players, and they didn't speculate. They just said sometimes players do this where they realize, hey, I'm going to declare, so I'm not going to go to class. Next year, they become academically ineligible. I'm not saying Metcalf did that necessarily, but that could be a situation where he's forced to go to school. Also, too, you don't know how home situations are and family goes. Sometimes these players are playing for more than themselves, and they have to declare anyway because of that. I mean, I think Metcalf probably still declares just because that potentially he could be the number one wide receiver still even with that injury, but he could pull a Mike Williams like a couple of years ago when he was at Clemson, hurt his neck off the goalpost the first game of the year. He came back still a ton he declared. So it'll be in how either way his draft stock doesn't really get affected for me.
All right, and what about you, Dwight, on the news and notes?
Obviously, the Nick Bosa thing is pretty. The ripples that it's going to put through the community, I've already seen. I watched some sports TV today, and I mean, ESPN they were talking about it for at least a half an hour. Just, a lot of people don't agree with that, but I don't understand. I mean, I definitely see why he did it and why he just said, I'm done. I'm leaving. I'm not even going to try. I'm declaring. It makes sense for him from a standpoint. But I think it's going to cause some ripples in the community, and definitely some people don't agree with it, but I can see more players following this path, and it's got the potential to shake up college football pretty bad.
Yeah, I'm going to try not to go on a rant here, but I can't understand how any logical person could disagree with what Nick Bosa did. He already got what he wanted out of the NCAA, and the NCAA already got plenty out of him. So it would make absolutely no sense for him to keep trying to fight through an injury when he's going to go probably in the first round of the draft next year. That would just be unbelievable. I can't understand how anybody could think this man owes more to this school, as much money as he's already made them. But whatever, I guess I'm just a guy. So we're coming up on some big games this weekend. This is October 17th. We're recording this, so the coming weekend. What are some of the games that you will not miss this weekend?
Dwight, I feel like you're going to be a little bit more impassioned, so I'll let you go first. Since the touch is close to home.
I'm seething, man. I'm seething. Michigan versus Michigan State up here, baby. It's Michigan State's biggest game of the year, so it's always the rivalry, the hate, like my timeline on Facebook is just flooded right now with people holding up a beaten up Wolverine or a battered Spartan bloody. It's my favorite time, and I always have to work every Saturday night for this, and I always end up kind of having to pick it up the pieces as it goes. But yeah, I'm really excited to see how Michigan's offense does this week after they seem to have really hit their stride. I mean, they annihilated Wisconsin. So I'm curious to see how that rushing offense goes up against MSU's rushing defense, which is one of the best in the country. So it's going to be, it's always a bloodbath. It doesn't matter if one team's 9-0 and the other's 0-9. It's always a good game. So that's what I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, and I mean, it's big too for Jim Harbaugh. He hasn't beat Michigan State at this point.
Yes, that is very true.
I mean, us Harbaughs got to stick together for that.
Right. Another one I'm looking forward to is Mississippi State and LSU. I'd like to see what Kylan Hill does. He's one of my favorite players. He has been a little hit and miss this season, but I'm curious to see how he does against that LSU defense. So I definitely want to catch that game as well.
And what about you, Andrew? Who are you looking forward to this weekend?
As for me, I would probably say the one I'm most excited about is NC State and Clemson. Ryan Finley, quarterback for NC State, is one of my top prospects. Coming into the year, some people had him as the QB1 ahead of Herbert even. But he's had a so-so year. And he's also, just like we talked about, Harbaugh hasn't beat Michigan State. Finley hasn't beat Clemson in the 2 attempts he's had. He's 0 for 2. He also doesn't have very impressive stats, but on tape, he looks a little bit better than what he's putting on the box score. I think if he comes out and has a strong showing and he has a big win against the number 3 team in the country, then he could see his stock jump up as well. Because especially with Herbert playing this weekend against a big game in Washington State, they're going to be going against each other essentially in the draft stocks, I think. Plus, having that Clemson defense you're going against would speak volumes as well, because you have a whole defensive line that could be first-round picks.
Right.
That's massive. That matchup is huge. So let's stick with you, Andrew. Who are some of the players that are in big-time matchups this weekend you either want to see perform well or bounce back?
I want to see, with the potential of the Metcalf injury, keeping him in school and potential teams being scared just because of that 4-letter word neck. I want to see what A. Brown can do, his teammate, who's been all over social media supporting him and saying he's going to carry the load for the team. I want to see what J.J. Arcega-Whiteside from Stanford can do. He's been a touchdown magnet this year, being a big red zone target. And I want to see what N'Keal Harry can do. I want to be able to separate a little bit better from players. I want to see him put out a good showing this weekend as well. I think the whole receiving class needs to have a good weekend to keep the momentum going with the way people have been talking about him.
Yeah, let's talk about N'Keal Harry for a second, because for a long time he was the 101 projected, which obviously that changes quite often. It didn't last year. Saquon Barkley never, ever moved from the 101 spot, but oftentimes you do see the 101 shift. Think Ezekiel Elliott jumping over Laquan Treadwell, thank goodness. What's you guys' thoughts on N'Keal Harry? Is he already out of that 101 spot for both of you?
He is for me.
I think it depends on. Oh, go ahead, Dwight.
I think he is for me, but I think the splitting hairs between him and AJ Brown. I think it'll depend on the situation, because as you've seen, you can end up on the Titans. You know, Corey Davis is an awesome player, just a bad system, bad team. You know, like not a bad team, but a bad system. So I think if AJ Brown and N'Keal Harry are so close, like as overall talent, and it's going to depend a lot on the landing spot for me.
Yeah, I think landing spot speaks volumes about what a player's chances and development can lead to. Because like you mentioned, Corey Davis, I think if he was in, say, Green Bay, where Aaron Rodgers is going to be tossing him the ball, he's obviously going to develop a lot quicker. But he's in a system where it's this smash mouth with Mike Vrabel right now and Marcus Mariota, who's not looking very good. But I think as far as looking at 101, I think Harry can get it. I think it all just depends on if Metcalf declares. I mean, if Metcalf declares for me, he's still my top target in drafts if he declares. Regardless of where he goes, I think he'll be able to produce.
Well, good, because I'm looking to get a trade done for N'Keal Harry, so hopefully that works out. The last thing we want to touch on is going to do a little bit of projecting towards this weekend, and we kind of want to see what storyline will be talked about next week. So next show, what will we be dying to talk about? We'll go ahead and start with you, Dwight.
I'm really hoping that we talk more about Herbert next week. I think he's a guy who's pretty much considered the number 1 overall quarterback, but I want to see him do a little more. He's been, to me, his statistics have not been that great this year, and I think he's got a chance in a huge game on TV, and he's got to do it for me. I'd like to see him put up that 390-yard 4-touchdown game and just really, really show what he's got, because he is, it's between him and Finley and a lot of people like Will Greer, and yeah, I'd like to see what he does, and I do think, as much as this pains me to say, I do think Michigan's going to take a step forward this week, and their hopefully offense is going to I hate saying this. It hurts. It hurts, man. It hurts. But yeah, I do think Michigan is going to finally shake that monkey off their back and get Harbaugh's first win.
Now, do you think Herbert's been well-rounded enough to be the 101 in the draft next year, assuming there's a QB needy team, or is a QB needy team probably trading back for one of those guys like Nick Bosa to go 101?
No, I think he is. He's done enough, but I haven't seen much of a statement game this year that I'd like to see from him. He's a very solid quarterback. He's got really good touch and anticipation, things like that. A lot of tools that work right. I just want to see him just light up somebody. Sure. I'd like to see that killer instinct, because that's what I think separates a lot of the good ones from the great ones.
Sure, like Baker.
And yeah, sure. Anyway.
All right, so
I love Baker. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm all about Baker. All right, so Andrew, what are you looking to talk about next week? Hoping that happens this weekend.
I'm gonna keep the madness rolling in college football after all the last weekend. I think NC State and the Wolfpack and Ryan Finley will be able to knock off Clemson, and I think everyone will be talking about who's going to be the new team to replace them in the college football playoff come Monday. I do think Finley should – it's the third time he's seen him. It's kind of like baseball now. You see pitchers go in 5 innings because they don't want the batting order to see him a third time because usually you can get him figured out by then. I think that's what's going to happen this weekend with NC State and Finley. So I'm interested to watch that. I could be completely wrong, and Farrell and Lawrence could go full Ezekiel Elliott and eat him up all game. So it's going to be fun to watch either way. And then, like he mentioned, Michigan State, Michigan, I always enjoy watching the rivalry games. So it'll be another fun weekend. On paper, it doesn't look very good, but if you look at prospects and matchups and stuff like that, there's a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, and those playoffs seedings matter to us because it's more opportunity to see players that we want to see. So if you don't have any standings in the college playoffs and you just want to root for a team, find the prospects that you want to see more of and cheer for them to get into the playoffs, because that's what I'll be doing. I mean, you'll still get bowl games here and there, but I'd rather see 2 extra games out of the players that I want to see. But that's it. That's it for the first show, guys. Let's go ahead with you, Andrew.
Hey, Adam, hold on.
Go ahead.
Hey, we did have one question already, actually, if I could bring that up real quick.
Oh, yeah, bring it up.
Yeah, we got a question that came in from Sean Robertson at Eagles for Life. He's actually in at least one league with him, the World War Football League. He asked, he's a first-year Devy player. He's curious our thoughts on how you properly value Devy players in trade talks with owners, i.e. unknown speculative assets via a known asset. I feel like this is something we're going to come up on in probably every episode a little bit. So it's kind of a broad question on how you value the Devy players. And we did talk about it a little bit already with you when you talked about your trading. But it's really hard to say. Andrew, do you think it's probably every league is different depending on your Devy pool and things like that as to how valuable they are?
I think it matters on how your team looks too, because like this receiving class looks really good. So if you're loaded at receiver, then you may see those picks as a little bit more loosey-goosey. But like, as you were mentioning, targeting 2020 picks, I'm in a league where I'm very weak at running back. So I've accumulated 3 2020 picks in preparation for that so I could refill that position. I think you have to look at how your team is, and you got to know your team. Right? I mean, if you're looking at it every week, setting it, you know the target and what you want to go after. Ready to be hard on yourself. If you're not, then you're going to regret it later.
And it's honestly, I mean, you can think that we can say is A.J. Brown is the top receiver or DK Metcalf is the top receiver, but the bottom line is nobody's a sure lock either. Mm-hmm. So we can't trade them as if they're Antonio Brown, even though we may think they're going to be. It's definitely tricky. You got to find that right balance in there, and it depends on the depth of your Devy pool, the construction of your team, and all that. And it's definitely something we'll talk about in probably almost every episode. So,
and keep in mind that the rookie drafts are just it's onslaught, really. I mean, we're gonna do our absolute best, but you're still gonna have crazy stuff happen. I mean, my favorite one was I got Jarvis Landry in the middle of the second when they came out in 2014. Uh, it just happens. So you talked about the you want him to be Antonio Brown, but you just never know. But speaking of Antonio Brown, I might be able to help this listener out a little bit with the trade that you were helping me through, and I don't think that the other owner is going to end up accepting it. But we were at least talking back and forth, and I'm not a big Devy guy. I'm just here so I don't get fined. But I ask you and I ask other smart people my Devy questions. So in my only league that I've decided I'm actually going to rebuild because I'm extremely bullish on rebuilding. I've got Antonio Brown, and a contender's interested in Antonio Brown. So I've asked them for Calvin Ridley, N'Keal Harry, and Royce Freeman. So if you're asking about trading for Devy assets, well, it's really, you can't say I'm trading for next year's 101 because by next year, N'Keal Harry could be the 105. But you have to go look at that player and stop associating a pick to him because it's Devy depleted, which means that the picks are gone. So essentially, you would say that the first round is pretty much already taken, right, Dwight? That's what Devy depleted would mean to you?
Typically, yeah. I mean, there's always one that slips through the cracks. I mean, Baker Mayfield slipped through a lot of cracks last year, actually. And so there's always one that does. But yeah, that's what it means, basically.
Sure. So if it's Devy depleted, you can't really associate those Devy players with picks. So I can't say I'm trading Antonio Brown for next year's 101 and Calvin Ridley and Royce Freeman. I just have to look at N'Keal Harry and say, am I trading Antonio Brown for a good player? Do I believe in N'Keal Harry? And that's probably the best advice to you is that it really depends. Do you believe in the player? Because you have to really you have to go all in when you're trading for Devy stock.
Correct.
All right, guys. Well, great first show. I had a lot of fun. I hope that the listeners do as well. We look forward to interacting with you on Twitter. Again, I'm Adam Wilde, host of Dynasty Owners Manual, and you can find me at DHH_Adam. Andrew, could you go ahead and let the listeners know where they can find you and some of the stuff you're working on?
Yeah, no, I have a Devy Radar article that comes out every single week on Dynasty Happy Hour. And on there with article players to watch for the weekend to kind of give you a guide and then make your own assumptions on players. My Twitter handle is at DHH_Mandrew. I'm always on not more than my wife wants me to be, so you can always find me on there. And if you have questions, send them in. We want to be as interactive with you guys as possible because this is for you, the fantasy players. We want to help you succeed. So that's all I have to add with that. I'll let you go, Dwight, now.
You can find me on Twitter at FFPeeblesChamp. That's spelled PEEBLES. Like the store, if you have one of those around you. I'm not sure. You can find my work on Dynasty Happy Hour, Fantasy Authority. Mainly write about IDP. Every once in a while I venture off on some crazy tangent, I love talking to people on Twitter, and yeah, just hit me up if you have any questions.
And when we say write in, you can actually email at Devy Owners Manual on Gmail, or you can just DM any of the three of us, and we really appreciate you listening. See you next time.
Peace.
All right, good job, dudes. Good job.
Yeah, no, I think we got more relaxed.
Yeah, it's much better. Much better.
Yep. Anyone have any thoughts before I stop the broadcast?
No, I'll try to make that where I cut you off for the question a little smoother. But
you'll be able to.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll be able to cut it up.
If I can actually put it somewhere earlier I might too, and instead of on the end like that. The recap should probably be the last thing. So I'll see what I can do.
And then there was another part that Andrew broke up. Andrew's connection broke up real bad on mine, but I don't know if it did for you. But I re-asked the same question to you right after. So if you can't salvage Andrew's answer, just use your audio because I asked basically the same question again to you. And then only other thing I had is if I if I ask a question where I say like, I'll have both of you tell me about blah blah blah. If I start with you, Dwight, Andrew, just pick up right after Dwight. You don't have to wait for me to be like, so what about you, Andrew? That way,
Okay.
I'd rather it be like a fluent conversation with you two rather than
there was a couple times where we were able to do that, but then there was, like you said, a couple of times where you're kind of like, okay, let's do this now.
Right. So we're super scripted on Dynasty Owners Manual, but from talking to you guys, it seemed like you guys wanted more of a conversational feel. So that's one way to get that. It's just like I'll introduce the question, then y'all just go at it. Just say whatever you want, no, and then I'll rely on me to reel it back in.
All right. Sounds good.
All right,
man.
dudes. Good job. All right, I'll talk to y'all in the chat.
You gonna post the YouTube link on the conversation or?
Yeah, I will.
Okay. All right. Sounds good, man. All right.
later,
Thanks, guys.
Yep. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Good job, Dwight.